Hello, everyone. Welcome to the last session on historical legacies. My video is a bit blurry, so let me see if I can fix this. Sometimes if I do this, yeah, it's a bit better now. Anyway, today I plan to finish that section and we'll pick up a new section on Monday. So let me share my screen. To show you where we left on Wednesday, or around where we left on Wednesday. So we have been discussing the beginning of this section within historical legacies called independence from Spain and Portugal, obviously. Political change without economic transformation. And I emphasize the importance of these words because they summarize exactly what happened, and that's the point I'm trying to make here. So very quickly, by the 1800s, Latin American countries were ready to get independent, fueled by what was happening in the US, 1776, and in France in 1789. These revolutions were, the beginning of a series of like a domino effect throughout Latin America, because many of these independent movements were inspired really by the ideals of democracy, the establishment of republics, and of course getting rid of monarchies. This coincided with a very important historical fact, which was the invasion of France of Spain. And I already mentioned Pepe Botella, Jose Bonaparte, the brother of Napoleon, that took over Spain. And of course, that was a great opportunity for the Spanish born in Latin America to overthrow the queen and the king of Spain. They took it, of course. And in addition, we talk about the importance at the time of the writings and ideas of Adam Smith, this very famous British economist, considered by some as the father of modern economics, because essentially he was debating the mercantilist approach and argued that international trade was not a zero-sum game, but in fact, international trade could benefit everybody if every country specializes in what they do best. So the ideas of Adam Smith were really simple, actually. If a given country has a lot of labor, they should concentrate in the production and exports of labor-intensive goods and services. If a country has a lot of capital, they should produce and export things that have heavy content of capital. If there is a country with lots of oil, they should be producing and exporting oil. If there is a country with lots of copper, sugar, cotton, they should emphasize production and exports of those goods. And that's the way, according to Adam Smith, to counter the ideas of mercantilist approaches, because by specializing in the production of one or two particular commodities, productivity worldwide would increase, because by specializing, the idea of division of labor, you do this, you do that, you do that, we are become a specialist, and then we do things better, we do things faster, with less resources, right? So anyway, the combination of all of these things gave a birth to these independence movements in Latin America. And by 1822, with the exception of Cuba, that was occupied by Spain and in a way by the US as well, for the next 100 years or so, every other country in Latin America became independent. And then I also briefly talk about the fact that leadership of independent movements was not composed or comprised by indigenous populations, as many people may think. No, it was not the natives really, or the Native Americans really. It was the Spanish blood people born in Latin America who took charge because they were resenting the Spanish from Spain that were governing them, that they were calling the shots, that they were leading everything. And of course, they were in direct connection with the crown that the Creoles, after 2 or 3 generations had lost. So they understood what needed to be done. They have the basic knowledge about how to do it. They were reading, people from the Enlightenment in Europe. They were, following the news of what was happening in France, in Spain with Napoleon, in the U.S. North, with the Revolutionary War. And of course, this gave rise to movements led by Simón Bolívar and Miranda in Venezuela, Moreano and San Martin in Argentina, and probably one of the most famous here in California because of the large Mexican population is the priest Miguel Hidalgo in Mexico. Unfortunately, like I said before, none of these people, as educated as they were, relatively speaking, had a very good idea about how to create and administer a well-functioning, democratic, sound government. They essentially failed to establish a democracy all throughout the 19th century. So yes, by 1822, the Latin American countries became independent, but that was not necessarily something good because, one, they were unable for 100 years to establish a well-functioning government. And number two, the level of wealth concentration did not improve. All that happened with the independence movement was that the Spanish born in Spain left, or at least if they didn't leave physically, they were not in charge anymore. They cut ties with the Spanish crown, but nothing else happened. The same Spanish law remained, scholastic approaches remain, and many other institutional arrangements that had been in place for 300 years did not change. And this is where I left on Wednesday. The only thing that there was some agreement about was the opposition to the large concentration of land owned by the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church remained, obviously, in Latin America, despite the fact that the Spanish government didn't. And of course, the moral and religious influence and weight of the Catholic Church, has remained since then, even through most recent years. We're going to talk about that, how that's changing, because many reasons. But, I remember when I was growing up, we used to say that 96, 97% of the population in Mexico, and it was pretty much the same across Latin America, was Catholic. If you look at the most recent statistics and national official statistics, that number is declining very quickly. Last time I checked, we're around 90%, and in some other countries it's even lower than that, because many Protestant and other religious groups are, taking advantages of some of the discontent by followers of the Catholic Church, for reasons that escape this class. But the point is that things are changing a little bit. But anyway, right after the independence, the Catholic Church owned a significant amount of wealth because they own lots of land. In fact, in Mexico, even before independence, there were some groups that were opposing the Catholic Church, specifically the Jesuits, this very specific group within the Catholic Church that is very knowledgeable, that is very, actually pretty wealthy as well. They had been expelled even before the independence movement. There is a very famous president of Mexico by the name of Benito Juarez, which is right here. Benito Juarez, a person of Indian descent from Oaxaca, and that's one of the states in Mexico City. that became president, and he was one of the people that led the movement against the church position. And again, this is not a history class, but this is only to illustrate that in some countries like Mexico, they took this very seriously. They went after the church, and they were successful. They basically, in this reform movement, they took over many of the land ownership back to government hands rather than the church. But anyway, like I said, going back really quickly, political change without economic transformation. So yes, the Spanish were gone, the Spanish government was gone. So there was a significant political transformation because now there was no taxation to Spain, no ruling from Spain, no dependence from Spain, no exploitation from Spain, but everything remained the same within Latin America. There was pretty much no scientific progress during the 19th century. This is extremely important, guys. You know, the fact that Latin America was unable to establish a well-functioning government that gave stability to build a more sound economic system that could launch the beginning of economic development and equitable, sustainable economic development. Because think about this, all this mess is taking place in Latin America, and it is during these years, you know, at the end of the 18th century and the beginning of the, at the end of the 18th and the beginning of the 19th century, where, when rather, the Industrial Revolution is taking place in Europe, mainly in England. And of course, all of this is being transferred with the British colonization of the now USA to the USA. So here is one more point of comparison, historical comparison of the differences that later on shaped economic development in these two places. So on the one hand, you have Latin America in disarray, politically, economically, socially, and on the other hand, and of course, technologically, and on the other hand, you have the US mainly, and of course, Canada eventually, receiving all these benefits of, well, they have now a constitution, they have more diversity in terms of, religious diversity. They also had all these influx of new technology for manufacturing and all these things, thanks to the Industrial Revolution that totally bypassed Latin America. They were busy trying to organize themselves. We were busy trying to organize ourselves. Anyway, here is another interesting fact that some of you in other classes in the history department or the Latin American major or the Chicano Latin American studies department, anyway, have probably learned. And this is the emergency or the emergence, rather, of a new type of leadership called caudillos. And again, I don't think there is a good word to translate in English, to English, these caudillos. So we're talking about a group of people, a group of leaders, mostly of military background that took over in the middle of this confusion. You know, you guys in the Catholic Church are being dispossessed of your land. You know, you may have all the moral authority, priest, but you don't have a clue about how to govern a country. So the military people that had a bit more understanding of organization, of administration, they basically said, okay, we're taking over, right? Just to give you an example of the level of complexity, again, using Mexico, from 1821 to 1860, so during the first years of independence, Mexico got independent in 1820. So the independence war lasted 11 years. So from 1810 to 1820, 21, that was the period in Mexico of the independence movement. Anyway, after, now that Mexico became independent, for the first 40 years, just get this, try to picture this. Mexico had more than 50 different governments. None of those lasted more than a year because the president got killed, the president, suddenly disappeared or resigned, or something happened, and military leaders were 35 of those over 50 different governments. So it was the land of the stronger. It was the land of the louder. It was the land of the land of the bully. In some cases, right? And the point is, it was total confusion. It was total chaos. No political structure, no economic coherence. It was really hard. So, many people said, okay, why try to break something when it has been working relatively okay for 300 years? So many of these new leadership, including some caudillos, went back to this security of the latifundio. It was not the encomienda system anymore, but it was latifundio in the sense that there was land concentration, ownership of land concentration. Also, there was at the very top the Creoles in charge. And, the idea is, why do we need to risk something that is already built that seems to be working, at least for us? And they went with it. And of course, they start using arguments to support this decision making. For example, this is the time where many of these countries in Latin America began this very primitive industrialization period that was characterized by concentration on a single commodity or a dominant commodity, right? Now, remember, this was totally in line with Adam Smith's recipe for success. All they needed to do to become wealthy was to concentrate in what they do best or what they have the most. For the case of Latin America, they had lots of labor and lots of natural resources. So you have cotton in Peru, bananas in Costa Rica, coffee in Brazil and Colombia, and so forth. We talk already about oil in Venezuela. So countries engage in this so-called commodity lottery because it was really pure luck, if you will, that a particular region of the world, like Venezuela, had lots of oil underground, or the climate to grow bananas and pineapples, or here's another interesting one. I don't know if you are familiar with this, but one of the largest producers of meat, beef, in the world are Argentina and Uruguay. So actually, if you go to places like Costco here in Fresno, sometimes you may get beef that comes from Argentina, Uruguay, USDA approved and all that. It's like super high quality. In fact, if you go to Argentina and Uruguay, you can get to world famous restaurants where they serve, churrascos and many other different cuts of meat that we are not familiar with here in the U.S. So the story I'm telling you, I'm telling you this because I remember I was in Argentina a few years ago, and they took us to this very fancy restaurant, and the chef came, and I said, "Hey, I'm an economist, and I would like to know what is giving Argentina and Uruguay this huge advantage over pretty much any country in the world when it comes to beef." And they said, the chef said, "Oh, that's so easy. That's actually a very interesting historical fact." So the story goes like this: when the Spanish came with all these cows and sheep and all these animals, they put them in this place called Pampas, P-A-M-P-A-S, PAS in Argentina, Uruguay, which are this huge extension of green areas. And of course, these cows and these animals from Europe didn't have natural predators. So there were no coyotes or wolves or whatever. They were killing these animals in Europe. They were not here in Latin America. So they start reproducing like rabbits, really. I mean, hundreds and thousands and millions. So I don't know what the ratios are now, but I remember have read that in Argentina and Uruguay, there are some years more heads of cows, beef, than people in the country. So think about that. And this is where, all this beef, really high quality meat comes from Argentina, Uruguay, because of, no predators for literally hundreds of years. And that's how they develop such high quality. Anyway, sorry for that. I think it was a good story. Hopefully you enjoyed that. But anyway, so here is another problem. Let me highlight this really quick. Because of the teachings and ideas of Adam Smith, the economic development goals were aiming at developing the export sector. So we need to produce what we do best in each country, whether it's beef or oil or coffee or whatever, sell it to the international markets, whether it's England or France or Australia or whatever, then get all these, remember this from the last class, hard currency or foreign exchange, and then use those monies, whether it is euros, well, at the time there wasn't euros, it was the Dutch mark or whatever, but dollars and other important currencies, any currency that was used as mean of international payment, and use those monies to buy what we are not producing. So if we are producing lots of cotton and sugar and oranges, but we are not producing medicines or we are not producing clothes, well, let's sell all of these commodities first, get the money and buy from somebody that is really good at producing clothes or medicines, because they are presumably going to be cheaper, of higher quality. And that's how, international trade works its magic, according to Adam Smith. Mm-hmm. Of course, these ideas also produce a very dramatic problem. The appearance of multinational corporations, and mostly we're talking about, at the time, American and British multinational corporations, MNCs. This is what MNC stands for, multinational corporation. In some other books, you may encounter this as T, I can change this. But it would be the same, transnational corporations. The point is that we're talking about companies that have physical presence in more than one country. So, now it's like a no-brainer. You have Google. It's a multinational corporation because they have presence all over the world, Facebook and others. But they're like service-based, electronic telecommunications-based. No, I'm talking about the old type of multinational corporations, like, for example, United Fruit Company was a company that was based in the USA, but had arms and have satellite companies in especially Central America, particularly Costa Rica. Later, companies like this transform and change names to something that is more familiar, like Chiquita. I don't know if you have eaten some bananas with the Chiquita brand name. Sounds Spanish, sounds like, oh, that's come from Costa Rica, Latin American, that's good, let's help these guys. Well, guess what? Many of these companies today are really employing labor in Latin America, but these farmers don't own the bananas or the pineapples or the papayas or the mangoes they produce, they are owned by the multinational corporations. And of course, all the farmers they receive is a salary. We're going to talk about that later. But the point is, this is the state of Latin America during those days. Disarray, concentration on a particular commodity that we already talked about this briefly last class, produced the so-called Dutch disease. You know, the idea that many of these countries enjoy, at least temporarily, during those times when the price of the commodity they were producing was high, an economic boom, an economic expansion. But that produced two problems. One, like I said already, too much risk. The risk was too high. That's number one, because when the price of the commodity went down, heavy dependence of income from that commodity just went, would go away. When the price of oil drops from $100 per barrel to 20, overnight, you can cut your main source of revenue by 80%, right? And that's not good. And here is the other important problem. So that's number two. When you concentrate on a single commodity, you neglect other important sectors of the economy. So if you're concentrating, for example, on oil, you may be neglecting agriculture, or you may be neglecting other, manufacturing industries that could be developing, employing people, supporting a more diverse economic base. The industry mix would be stronger. But no, rather you just concentrate on one, and that produces this Dutch disease, this concentration on a hot sector, a hot commodity. Just to give you an idea of this, here you have something that those of you with some basic understanding of finance are going to grasp really, really well. In finance, we say that if you want to minimize risk in your investment portfolio, what you can do is to diversify. Rather than buying a particular stock or one or two or three, shares of a particular company, you buy, 20 or 30. And some of the money, instead of going to the stock market, goes to a money market. The point is to diversify so that you don't put all your money in a single thing or a couple of things. Because if something goes wrong, things are going to go really bad for you. So that's a basic concept in finance. Well, here in economics, in this particular context, is the same. Let me give you the most dramatic example. So Cuba, at the time, let's talk about some other countries. Let's talk about Colombia. Colombia had 75% of all exports going to the US alone. And of course, the big consumers of commodities were, the most powerful countries at the time, specifically the ones that were in the process of industrializing. Remember, we're talking about powerful countries in the world that benefit from the Industrial Revolution. So the UK, France, Germany. So Colombia, we're talking about 82%. Again, I always forget this since I have it here. Let's use it. So I think this is going to work. I'm talking about this number right here. So Colombia was exporting 82% of everything they produce to only 4 countries. Think about that. And of course, these 4 countries were linked economically and politically as well. So if something was going wrong in one, typically will cascade to the other 3. So if something was going wrong in the UK or the US, would transmit to the other 4 countries, and suddenly the export level will go down. So here is the point. It's not just about concentration on a single commodity. It's also about concentration of your customer base. You don't want to concentrate your production on one or two commodities, the same way that you don't want to concentrate your sales on two or three customers, right? So you want to produce a lot of things for a lot of people. You want to produce not just a few commodities, but other manufactured goods in ag, in manufacturing, in services. And at the same time, you want to have a very diverse clientele around the world, so that if a particular commodity of a particular industry is failing and or a particular region of the world is not doing well, you have other sources of income that can, or counter the bad performance in one with a better performance in another, right? Well, that was not happening in Latin America. And of course, that proved a significant mistake, as we will discover in the next few classes. So let me clear this. All right. Now, let's clear this dot here that is bothering me. Okay. Now, what happened? Well, obviously, now that countries in Latin America were free from the Spanish and Portuguese rulers, they start moving in different directions, slightly different directions. So since the Spanish law was not the law governing the entire Latin American region, but every country became independent at different times, led by different people, and countries were of different size, with different natural resources endowment. And, there was a lot of similarities, of course, the same historical background, the same language, the same religion, and many other things that were common to all of them. There were a lot of differences, right? So because of the differences, we enter into this era that some economic historians call the era of state building, all right? So the idea that after all this chaos, after all this disarray and disorder, politically, economically, making mistakes, finally Latin America in the late 19th century, they start taking a bit more solid paths towards stability, political transformation, economic transformation, a more solid industry base, and so forth. So this is a simplification, of course, because we need to group things. But essentially, you see three different paths. In countries like Mexico and Venezuela, those are the ones that right now no other comes to mind, but the path became a single caudillo. So just to give you an idea, Porfirio Diaz was a president in Mexico that ruled, of course, this is not democratic by any means, from 1876 to 1911. Just do the math. And in Venezuela, Juan Vicente Gomez, by the way, they were both generals, military background. Juan Vicente Gomez ruled from 1908 to 1935. So no elections, no democracy. It was just, authoritarian regimes by single caudillos. And of course, in the case of Mexico, in 1911, that produced the Civil War, which in Mexico, people call it the Revolutionary War, which is kind of, different from what, we usually associate revolutionary with civil in the US. But in Mexico, in 1911, that, long rule by Porfirio Diaz produced the Mexican Revolution, right? Anyway, that's one path, Venezuela and Mexico. In other countries, mostly in South America, you have the emergency of very primitive manifestations of democracy, the so-called oligarchic democracies, because you had a very small number of people, only men, no females, that could vote for leadership, like presidents or governors or municipal presidents, which is the equivalent of a mayor here in the US. So between 3, 10, 15% of the population only, they were capable of exercising these voting rights to elect leadership. And this was common in places like Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, and others, mostly in South America. This is what some people call the first wave of democratization. I guess some people saw this as better than ruling by a single caudillo like Mexico or Venezuela. I probably agree with that, but anyway, we can debate. Now, here is a third path. And this is the first time where we are going to introduce the role of the US. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this sentiment among some people in Latin America. I mean, this is not just specific to Latin America. You can go to Asia, you can go to Africa and other places in the world where there is this not so positive perception when it comes to US foreign policy, this interventionist approach by, US government around the world. The point is that in places like Central America, I'm talking about like Panama, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, you had heavy US government intervention in the establishment of the political regimes of many of these countries. So just to give an idea, it's not a coincidence that, for example, the Panama Canal, let's see if I can, anyway, in this section right here of Latin America, I'm talking about this section right here, the point that joins Panama and Colombia. You have the thinnest, the narrowest section of land, and the US saw this as a very important geographical position, strategically speaking, because rather than going around this way to get things to the USA from Europe, I'm talking about machinery, equipment, goods, things that could be bought by Americans from Europe or from other regions in the world, coming this way, rather than, and if they wanted to put them in, in the West Coast, California, whatever, rather than going around, they said, what about, by the way, Panama and Colombia used to be the same country until the US intervened and they organized this revolt and they broke this region into two different countries, one of which became Colombia and the other became Panama, in order to build the Panama Canal. So that now ships could go through this canal, avoiding going around all this area and going there faster, cheaper, and well, of course, this required a major, to orchestrate a significant disruption in the peace and cohesion of societies in these countries, to make them fight against each other, break them apart, and therefore taking over in the name of peace and democracy. But of course, and you can check this later, I'm going to give you sources to declassify CIA information where you can actually read some of these things that happened, over 100 years ago. because actually the US took over this, and the Panama Canal was on lease to the US government for 100 years. So after 100 years, and that just happened a few years ago, the lease expired, and they were supposed to give the Panama Canal back to Latin American people. And of course they did. But of course, by the time they did that, Panama became pretty much like another Puerto Rico, similar to what I explained about Ecuador, that became dollarized so that you can actually buy things with US dollars in Ecuador. Ecuador is right here, by the way. The same thing you can do in Panama. I don't know if you have seen pictures of Panama City. You can Google Panama City, and you can see the skyline. It looks like a little New York. So anyway, the point is that Panama is not as Latin American as once was. Anyway, this is just a story to give you an example of the third path followed by some Latin American countries where we saw a heavy intervention by the US, like in Panama. We saw something similar in Nicaragua for other reasons. In fact, I was in Nicaragua a few years ago, and they were telling me the story that the original place to build the canal was Nicaragua, not Panama, because they were easier to dominate. And I don't know if you noticed this, but you see in the name, Nicaragua, agua in Spanish means water. So Nicaragua has huge lakes, specifically the Managua Lake and the Nicaragua Lakes, that are the second largest reserves of fresh water in the world after the Great Lakes in Canada and the US. So the idea was to build a canal using the lakes. So rather than breaking the land completely like they did in Panama, they could just break little parts and reach a lake, and then go to the end of the lake and start breaking the land to reach the next lake. Anyway, that was the original plan, but that didn't work because apparently the people, experts in seismology, that's earthquake people, determined that the land in Nicaragua was hugely unstable because of the high presence of volcanoes. So they have to change plans. But there were already military people from the US government in Nicaragua already, organizing how things were going to happen until, because of technicality, that's earthquakes, they said, no, let's move south, and they went to another place. But anyway, single caudillo, oligarchy democracies, and heavy military intervention by the US were the three main types of paths that political economy, that dictated the political economy of these countries in Latin America in the late 19th century. Mm-hmm. The last table is just basically a summary of what characterized Latin America in early stages of development. So this is, just a summary, really, of what we have talked about. Nothing that I have not mentioned yet. So anyway, this is the end of the first segment of this class, Historical Legacies. And again, the reason why I do this is to give you, I hope, a solid foundation from which we are going to start building up more specific and more laser-focused type of arguments when it comes to the political economy, development, economic history of different Latin American countries, all the way to, well, today, what's happening in Venezuela, what's happening in Ecuador, in Chile, in Mexico. We are going to start talking about eventually things like migration. It's a very important topic. human trafficking, narco trafficking. You know, how did that happen? Why is it happening? You know, who is behind? You know, how is that all these things are making it to the U.S.? The new caravans being organized in Honduras, El Salvador. Why? You know, all of these things have huge connections with what happened 3-4 centuries ago, and people just don't realize that. And I'm hoping that with this background, you know, what, 3 classes, 3 sessions, I can start shedding some light into these issues and hopefully help you guys to understand better why Latin America is like it is now. All right. Anyway, I didn't keep track of the time. I don't have a clock, so I have no idea how long this session was. But I think this is a good time to stop. If you're watching this on Friday, well, enjoy the rest of your Friday and have a nice weekend. If you are not, well, enjoy whatever day it is for you, and I will see you live on Monday. Thank you, guys. Until next time. Bye-bye.